"Be careful with that wine bottle. It costs more than your whole life." The mean words cut through the fancy restaurant like a knife. Bright lights hung from the ceiling. The air smelled like expensive food and rich people's perfume. Warren Kessler didn't even try to be quiet. Why would he? To him, the waitress was nobody. Just a ghost walking through a world where she didn't belong. Her name was Emma Carter, but nobody bothered to ask. She was 27 years old, pretty in a quiet way that didn't need attention. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup. No jewelry. Just tired shadows under her gray eyes from too many sleepless nights. Her black uniform was a little wrinkled, her shoes worn down at the heels. Hidden in her apron pocket was a small pink bracelet. Made of plastic beads, the last thing her 3-year-old daughter made before she died. Emma didn't flinch at the insult. She'd survived way worse than mean words. 4 years married to a cop who used his fists like weapons. A car crash that took her little girl while she was trying to escape. A courtroom where she told her story with dead eyes and a broken voice. She'd walked through hell and came out the other side, not whole, but still standing. These rich people with their expensive watches and cruel words. They weren't worth her anger, but in the darkest corner of the restaurant sat a man watching everything. His name was Ryan Bennett, 36 years old, head of the most powerful family on the East Coast. His blue eyes missed nothing. Not the way Emma's fingers tightened around her tray, not the steel hiding under her silence. He'd seen that look before. In Soldiers, in Survivors, in his own mirror. Minutes later, 5 armed men crashed through the doors. Guns raised, people screaming. Everyone hit the floor in panic. Everyone except Emma Carter. She stood there, calm as stone. In just 20 seconds, she took down all 5 men. Her movements sharp, precise, like someone trained for war. The rich crime lord in the corner watched, stunned. The whole room went silent, all their judgment exposed like an open wound. Here's what nobody in that room knew. Emma Carter wasn't just running from her past. Her past had just broken out of prison. And he was coming for her. The silence was heavy, thick, suffocating. Gunsmoke still hung in the air. Mixed with spilled drinks and raw fear, 5 men lay on the marble floor, hands locked in police cuffs. But nobody looked at them. Every eye was fixed on Emma. She stood there, the gun still in her hand. Chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. Face calm, like she'd just finished clearing a table instead of stopping 5 armed attackers. The police came, asked questions, took photos, camera flashes bursting like lightning. When the last officer left, the room finally started waking up from shock. Warren Kessler was the first to stand. His expensive watch had slid under a table somewhere, his pants stained with wine the color of blood. But he still tried to look powerful. He didn't look at Emma, not one word of thanks. Instead, he turned to his wife. His voice ground through clenched teeth. "Let's go. This place isn't safe." Regina Kessler nodded, hands shaking as she tried to fix her hair. Mascara smeared under her eyes like black tears, but she kept her chin high as she walked past Emma. Like the thin waitress hadn't just saved her entire family's lives. Boyd Kessler crawled out from under a table. Face pale as a ghost, he said nothing, just grabbed Tammy Wells, his influencer girlfriend. She was crying. Her phone lost somewhere, not even worth looking for. They left like ashamed ghosts. Footsteps hurried. Eyes on the floor, but Regina stopped at the door, looked back, her voice sharp enough for everyone to hear. She must have picked up those tricks somewhere. Pure luck, that's all. Anyone could have done it with a gun in their hand. Nobody answered. That silence was crueler than any words. A few other people nodded to Emma as they passed, lips forming thank yous that never quite made sound. They knew what she'd done. They knew she'd saved their lives. But admitting it meant admitting they'd been wrong, that the waitress they dismissed was worth more than every expensive watch and designer bag in that room combined. And rich people never admit they're wrong. Murray appeared like a rat after a storm, the 45-year-old manager. Bald head slick with sweat. Eyes darting everywhere. He grabbed Emma's arm, dragged her into the kitchen. His voice hissing between his teeth. Do you have any idea what you just did? The Kesslers are VIP. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars here every year. Now they'll never come back because you embarrassed them. Emma looked at him, gray eyes cold as ash. I saved their lives, Murray snorted, the laugh of a coward trying to sound strong. You caused a scene. You humiliated my customers. You're fired, Emma. Get your things and get out. Emma didn't argue. She was used to unfairness. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, set it on the counter. Her hand slid into her pocket, fingers brushing the pink plastic bracelet. The only thing she had left of her daughter Lily. She turned and walked away, steps steady, like nothing had happened at all. But a voice rose behind her, shaky but clear. This isn't fair. Theo stepped out from behind a shelf. The 18-year-old busboy with curly hair and bright brown eyes. He'd hidden there through the whole attack. Trembling with fear, but he'd seen everything. She saved everyone's lives. She saved yours. Without her, we'd all be dead. Murray spun around, eyes bulging. Shut up, kid. This isn't your business. But Theo didn't stop. He took a step forward. Fists clenched at his sides, voice still shaking, but refusing to retreat. I'll tell people what happened here. She's a hero, not a criminal. Murray ground his teeth, but said nothing more. He knew that these days, even a busboy could destroy a restaurant's reputation with a single video. Emma stopped, turned back toward Theo. For the first time that night, her eyes softened just a little. Thank you, but don't worry about me. I'll be fine. She slipped out the back door, her thin figure swallowed by the darkness of the alley. In a shadowed corner of the restaurant, Ryan Bennett still sat there, dark blue eyes following her until she vanished completely. He set his drink down, a thin smile on his lips. Interesting, very interesting. Emma hadn't reached the end of the alley when a low voice cut through the darkness. I don't see a waitress. I see the only soldier in a room full of cowards. She stopped, didn't turn around. Her instincts had warned her before the sound did. Someone following, light steps but deliberate. She knew who it was without looking. Ryan Bennett. Everyone in New York knew that name, even if not everyone dared to speak it. The head of the Bennett family. A powerful empire that had ruled the East Coast for 3 generations. Rumor said he could buy City Hall if he wanted. That more of his enemies lay at the bottom of the river than fish. That those blue eyes had seen things ordinary people couldn't imagine. Emma turned, faced the man standing a few steps away. Street lights threw shadows across his face, highlighting a thin scar through his right eyebrow. Marcus O'Connor stood behind him, his right-hand man, one shoulder bandaged, blood still seeping through white cloth. He'd been wounded in the attack, but remained standing like stone. What do you want from me? Emma's voice was calm but alert. Years in the military had taught her how to read people. Every instinct told her this man was more dangerous than anyone she'd ever met. Ryan stepped closer, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, like he was taking a walk instead of having just escaped death. Those 5 men came for me. You had no reason to get involved. So why did you do it? Emma was silent for a moment, weighing her answer. Because people were going to die. I couldn't just stand there. Ryan tilted his head, blue eyes narrowing, like he was trying to read something hidden under her calm face. You've seen death before. Not just seen it. You've walked straight through it. Emma didn't respond. Her silence was answer enough. Ryan nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. He pulled a black business card from his jacket. Nothing printed on it but a single phone number in silver. I need someone like you, head of my personal security. Name your price. Emma looked at the card, then back at him. Her gaze hardened. I don't work for criminals. A thin smile touched Ryan's mouth, not mocking, amused, like she'd surprised him. Criminals? What do you know about criminals, Miss Carter? Emma wasn't surprised he knew her name. A man like Ryan Bennett had ways of knowing everything. I know enough to stay away. Ryan stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. She caught the faint scent of whiskey and sandalwood. Dangerous and alluring all at once. Everyone works for someone, Miss Carter. The only question is whether you choose your cage or let someone else choose it for you. Emma didn't back away. She'd faced worse, at least in her own mind. Derek, her ex-husband, fists like sledgehammers. Rage without end. Compared to those 4 years of hell, a crime boss was nothing. I don't need anyone choosing a cage for me. I already broke out of one. I'm not stepping into another. She turned and started walking, but Ryan's voice followed her. Not loud, yet heavy enough to stop her cold. You're running. I can see it in your eyes. Whoever it is, whatever it is, you can't run forever. Emma stood still, back to him. Her heart kicked a little faster, but she didn't let it show. Surviving isn't running. Surviving is knowing when to walk away. She kept moving, her thin shape melting into the night. Ryan remained where he was. Watching, card still in his hand, Marcus stepped closer. Voice rough with pain, she turned you down. What are you going to do now? Ryan didn't answer right away. He stared where Emma had disappeared, blue eyes calculating something unseen. Finally, he slipped the card back into his pocket, turned toward the black car waiting nearby. She'll come back. People like her can't outrun their past forever, and when the past catches up, she'll need me. Marcus frowned, but didn't press. 20 years serving the Bennett family had taught him one thing. Ryan Ben. It was never wrong when it came to reading people. Emma's apartment sat on the 5th floor of a crumbling Brooklyn building. The elevator had been broken since last winter. The stairwell still smelled like stray cats. She climbed the steps in darkness, legs aching after a long night. Ryan Bennett's words still echoing in her mind. You're running. I can see it in your eyes. She shook her head, trying to push the voice away. He didn't know anything about her. Nobody did. She'd buried her past so deep that sometimes she almost forgot it existed. At least until night fell and the nightmares returned. She stopped outside her door, key already in hand. But something made her stop. The instincts of a soldier, of someone who'd lived too long in fear, warned her that something was wrong. The door stood slightly open, the gap no wider than a finger, but Emma knew she never left it that way. She shoved it open with her shoulder, body ready for an attack, but the apartment was empty, or at least the intruder had already gone. Emma flipped on the light. Her heart dropped into her stomach. The tiny apartment looked like a storm had torn through it. Drawers yanked open, clothes thrown across the floor, the mattress flipped upside down, white stuffing scattered like dirty snow. Kitchen cabinets gaped wide, a few cheap plates shattered under her feet. But it wasn't the mess that froze Emma in the middle of the room. It was what lay on the table, right in the center of the old wooden table where she ate breakfast alone every morning, sat the teddy bear. Or what was left of it, the small pale pink bear with button eyes and an embroidered nose, the one Lily hugged to sleep every night, the one Emma had kept as her only treasure after her daughter was gone. Now it lay there, ripped open from head to toe, white cotton spilling out like guts, and on a folded piece of paper beside it were words in red ink like blood. Miss the little girl, you'll see her again soon. Emma didn't know how long she stood there, maybe seconds, maybe minutes. Time stopped moving. All she could hear was her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. Derek, he was out of prison. He'd found her, her legs buckled. She sank to the floor. Trembling hands lifted the ruined bear. She clutched it to her chest, bits of stuffing drifting loose. And for the first time in years, Emma Carter cried. Not loud sobs, but silent tears sliding down her cheeks, the kind shed by someone who'd cried so much there was no strength left for sound. He touched the last thing she had of Lily. He destroyed it the way he destroyed everything else in her life. Her child, her youth, her faith in this world. Memories surged like a flood. Lily's smile on the morning of her 3rd birthday. Blowing out candles, making a wish Emma never knew. Her giggles as she ran through the park, brown hair flying in the wind. Tiny hands clutching the teddy bear. Her small voice calling Mama. The bear's hungry. Feed him. And then the night that changed everything. Tires screaming on wet pavement. Headlights blazing in the rearview mirror. Derek chasing them. Eyes red with drink and fury. Emma had tried to turn down a narrow road to get away, but the car spun and flipped. When she woke in the hospital, Lily was gone. Emma tightened her grip on the bear, feeling torn fabric scrape her skin. She'd thought she'd escaped. She'd thought 4 years in prison would make Derek forget her. She'd been wrong. Derek never forgot. Derek never forgave, and Derek never quit until he got what he wanted. She looked around the wrecked apartment. Suddenly knew she couldn't stay here. Not tonight. Not any night again. Derek had found her. If she stayed, he'd come back. And this time he wouldn't leave just a threat behind. Her hand slipped into her pocket. Touched the pink plastic bracelet still there. The one thing he hadn't found because she always kept it with her. And beside it, something else. The black business card with the silver phone number. The one she couldn't remember taking. Maybe Ryan had slipped it into her pocket when she turned away. Maybe Marcus had done it. She stared at the card, then at the shredded bear in her hands. She'd said she didn't work for criminals. But now, standing in the ruins of her life, Emma saw a hard truth. Sometimes to escape one devil, you need the help of another. Emma sat on the floor of the wrecked apartment until dawn started leaking through the thin curtains. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every small sound made her flinch. Rats inside the walls, traffic outside, a neighbor's footsteps overhead. Fingers tightening around the only kitchen knife that hadn't been broken. But Derek didn't come back, not that night. He wanted her afraid, wanted her waiting, worrying, imagining 100 different ways he might appear. That was his favorite game, wearing the prey down before striking. When the sun climbed higher, Emma pushed herself up. Legs numb, after hours of sitting still. She looked around at the broken pieces of her life, scattered everywhere. Knew she couldn't stay here another day. She pulled out the black card, silver numbers glinting in the thin sunlight. Her fingers traced the smooth surface. She remembered Ryan Bennett's words, "Everyone works for someone." The only question is whether you choose your cage or let someone else choose it for you. She'd refused him. Said she didn't work for criminals. But now, with Derek's threat bleeding from the red, stained note, Emma realized something. Sometimes the choice isn't between right and wrong, but between living and dying. She dialed, heart beating faster with every ring. 1, 2, 3. Then a familiar low voice answered. "I knew you'd call." Emma swallowed, throat dry. "Is your offer still good?" A brief pause. Then a soft laugh on the other end. Not mocking. Something closer to satisfaction. "Always, Miss Carter. I'll send someone to pick you up in an hour. Where are you?" Emma took one last look around the apartment. Nothing left to keep her here. Nothing left to lose. "I'll wait at the corner of Atlantic and Court." "And Miss Carter," Ryan's voice dropped, carrying a seriousness she hadn't heard before. "You made the right decision." She hung up without replying, because she didn't know if it was the right decision. She only knew it was the only one she could make right now. An hour later, a shiny black SUV pulled up to the curb where Emma stood. Small backpack holding everything she had left. Marcus O'Connor stepped out, arm still in a sling, his presence solid as a mountain. He opened the door for her. Gave a short nod. "Miss Carter." Emma climbed inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click, like the latch of a new cage. The drive lasted nearly an hour, through Manhattan's crowded streets, over bridges, into green suburbs where mansions hid behind iron fences and tall trees. And then she saw it. The Bennett estate rose like a castle from another time. Gray stone walls, black tile roofs, tall windows reflecting the afternoon sun like hundreds of watching eyes. The iron gates curved open as the car approached. A white gravel drive led straight into a wide courtyard, a marble fountain at its center. Emma stepped out of the car. Feeling like she'd crossed into another world, the air here was different, cooler, heavier, like the stone walls themselves were breathing. She heard birdsong somewhere in the gardens, but it only made the silence feel bigger. Ryan Bennett waited for her on the front steps, hands in his pockets, looking like he was greeting an old guest instead of a former waitress who'd just lost her job. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no jacket. For the first time, Emma noticed the tattoo running along his right arm. Beautiful Celtic patterns woven together. "Welcome home, Miss Carter." His voice was light, though his dark blue eyes studied every detail. "Or should I call you my new head of security?" Emma straightened, met his gaze without flinching. She might fear Derek, but she didn't fear this man, at least not yet. "Emma is fine. And before we start, I have one condition." Ryan tipped his head, interest plain on his face. "I'm listening. I work for you, not belong to you. I protect you, I don't blindly obey. And when the threat to me is over, I get to leave whenever I want." Ryan studied her in silence, blue eyes locked on hers. Then he nodded, a small smile on his lips. "Fair enough." He turned and headed inside. "And now let me introduce you to the only person in this house I don't dare argue with." Emma followed him inside, where shadow and light wove together like an old painting, and she knew that from this moment on, her life would never be the same again. The inside of the Bennett estate was even more amazing than the outside. Dark wood walls, high ceilings carved with beautiful designs, long hallways lit by old brass lamps. Emma followed Ryan through room after room, each one showing the quiet wealth of a family that had lasted for generations. It wasn't the flashy show-off stuff of the Kesslers, but an old power sunk deep into every brick, every rug, every painting on the walls. They stopped before a pair of big wooden doors. Ryan turned to her, his eyes carrying something she hadn't seen before. Not cold calculation, but something almost gentle, mixed with old pain that had scarred over instead of faded. "My grandfather, Hugh Bennett." His voice was lower than usual. "He built everything you see here, and he's the only person in this house I truly listen to." The doors opened. Emma stepped into a room flooded with natural light from wide windows overlooking the garden. Unlike the dark rest of the mansion, this space felt warm and open, like someone had carved out an island of peace inside a fortress. In the center of the room sat a wheelchair, leather and polished wood, and in it sat Hugh Bennett, 70 years old. But his blue eyes were still sharp as blades, the same eyes Ryan had clearly inherited. His white hair was combed neatly back, his lined face still showing traces of old strength. An oxygen tube rested under his nose. Every breath took effort. But when he looked at Emma, there was nothing weak in that look. "So this is the young woman who saved my grandson." His voice was rough, but still carried through the room. "Come closer, so I can see you properly." Emma stepped forward, stopped a few paces from the wheelchair. She didn't bow, didn't shrink, didn't act fake. She simply stood there and let the old man study her. Like she was a book he meant to read cover to cover. Hugh tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "My grandson is rarely surprised. He's seen too much to be startled by anything anymore. But you managed it. You made him see something he didn't expect." Emma replied evenly, "I only did what needed doing. Nothing special." Hugh gave a soft chuckle that turned into a wheezing cough. "Nothing special, you say?" He shook his head, gaze drifting. "You remind me of someone else, a young woman who used to say the same things, who believed her courage was ordinary." The air in the room shifted. Emma felt it before she understood why. Ryan stood behind her, and though she didn't turn, she knew he'd gone stiff, tense. The silence around him felt heavy, like lead, like the air itself had been pulled from the room. "Brianna," Hugh went on, his voice softening with pain that hadn't dulled in 12 years. "Ryan's sister, she had eyes like yours, you know. The eyes of someone who's seen too much and still refuses to bend." Emma stayed still, unsure how to react. She heard Ryan's breathing behind her, heavier and faster than before. "Grandfather," Ryan's voice cut in, ice cold enough. Hugh looked up, old eyes meeting his grandson's. A wordless exchange passed between them, a language only shared grief could speak. Then Hugh exhaled slowly, each breath heavy. She was taken when she was only 16. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "The Mornos. A rival crew, they wanted to trade her for territory. Ryan was only 24 then, newly in charge after his father was killed. He tried to save her. He did everything he could, but when he finally found Brianna, Hugh didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Emma understood. She understood because she'd once stood over her own child's cold body. She understood because she knew what it felt like when the world collapses and there's nothing you can do to stop it. "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. Ryan didn't look at her. He'd already turned away, shoulders locked tight, hands clenched into fists. His face was hidden by shadow, but Emma didn't need to see it to know what lived there. Pain, guilt, rage with nowhere to go. "Let me show you to your room." Ryan's voice was cold again, stripped of feeling. He left without waiting for her. Emma watched him go, then turned back to Hugh Bennett. The old man was studying her, blue eyes bright with something that looked very much like hope. "You're his second chance, child," Hugh whispered with quiet certainty. "Don't let him waste it the way I wasted mine." Emma didn't understand what he meant, but she nodded anyway, then turned and followed the man carrying 12 years of guilt and loss on his shoulders. The first days at the Bennett estate passed in tight silence. Emma was given a room in the east wing of the house, not large but spotless, windows overlooking the gardens. A bed softer than anything she'd slept on in the past 2 years. She didn't sleep much. Old habits were hard to break. Every night she still woke at 3 in the morning, heart racing, ears straining for footsteps that didn't exist in the hallway. But at least here, she didn't have to fear Derek standing on the other side of her door. On the third day, Emma went to work. Marcus O'Connor led her to the training grounds behind the mansion, a wide area with everything, punching bags, shooting targets, a full gym, an obstacle course. The Bennett security team numbered 12 men, every one of them at least 2 heads taller than she was. And every one of them watched her with clear doubt when Marcus introduced her as their new head of security. The tallest stepped forward, shoulders as wide as a doorway. His name was Brennan. The smile on his lips wasn't friendly. "So you're the one who's supposed to command us." Some skinny girl from nowhere. Emma didn't answer. She simply looked at him. Gray eyes hard as steel. Then she took off her jacket, showing a fitted black shirt and the scars along her arms. Scars she never bothered to hide. "Let's see," her voice was calm, like she was inviting him for coffee. Brennan laughed out loud, glanced at his teammates like she'd just told the best joke of the year. Then he lunged, fist driving straight for her face. 3 seconds later, he was face down in the dirt, his arm locked behind his back. Emma's knee pressed into his spine. The rest of the team froze, mouths hanging open. Emma stood, brushed her hands off, looked at them one by one. "I don't need you to trust me. I need you to follow my orders. Anyone else want to try?" No one spoke. Brennan scrambled to his feet, cheeks burning red with shame, but he didn't dare meet her eyes again. From that moment on, the team listened. Emma didn't train them like a tyrant. She trained them like someone who'd walked through real battlefields. She taught them how to move in tight spaces, how to read body language to spot threats, how to protect a person in a crowd without drawing attention. The skills she'd learned in the military, lessons written in blood and loss, she now passed on to them. And they learned, one by one, the way they looked at her changed. No more doubt, but respect. No more contempt, but admiration. Ryan watched all of it. Emma knew he was watching, even when he never showed himself on the training field. She caught his shape behind second-floor windows, felt those dark blue eyes following her from the study balcony. He was weighing her, trying to understand who she really was beneath that calm face. Sometimes they crossed paths at dinner. Quiet meals in the grand dining room. Hugh at the head of the table, Marcus to Ryan's right, Emma across from them. No one spoke much, Hugh because his health wouldn't allow it, Marcus because he was a man of few words, Ryan because he wasn't the sort to make small talk. But Emma sensed the shift in the way Ryan looked at her. In the first week, he'd studied her like a tool, a weapon he'd just bought. In the second week, that look sharpened with curiosity. By the third, she caught him watching her as she read in the library, and in his eyes she saw something close to respect. One afternoon, just as Emma finished a training session, Ryan appeared on the grounds for the first time. He walked over, hands in his pockets, stopped a few steps from her. They say you've changed the entire team's defensive strategy in 3 weeks." His voice was flat, though his eyes were not. "Marcus claims it's the best thing that's happened to security in 5 years." Emma wiped sweat from her forehead. "No pride, no false modesty. I'm just doing my job." Ryan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're doing more than that." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing there with a strange feeling in her chest. She didn't need anyone's approval. She didn't work for praise, but something in the way Ryan had said those words, in the way he'd looked at her, made her realize this was no longer just a job. She was becoming part of something larger. And that both scared her and stirred a feeling she hadn't known in a very long time: hope. The meeting with Andrei Volkov was scheduled for Saturday night, at a Russian restaurant in Brighton Beach that he owned. Emma didn't want Ryan going alone, and Ryan had no intention of leaving her behind. She was his head of security. Her presence was a statement, a reminder to Volkov that the Bennett family wasn't weak. They arrived in 2 black SUVs, Marcus riding in the lead vehicle with 3 men from the team. Emma sat in the back with Ryan. The entire drive, he didn't say a word, staring out the window, face thoughtful. Emma didn't try to make conversation either. She'd learned that Ryan Bennett was a man of silence, and sometimes that silence spoke louder than anything else. The restaurant sat at the end of a quiet street, modest on the outside, but inside it was filled with old-world luxury. Crystal chandeliers, red velvet curtains, oil paintings of Russian landscapes lining the walls. Andrei Volkov was already waiting at the VIP table when they entered. 50 years old, silver hair cut close, square jaw, steel gray eyes. He wore a black suit and a gold ring carved with a double-headed eagle, the symbol of the Volkov Empire. 2 bodyguards stood behind him like stone statues. Bennett, Volkov rose, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Thank you for coming, and I see you've brought a new guard." He turned his gaze to Emma, gray eyes looking her over openly. Emma remained still, expression unchanged, though inside she was ready for anything. They took their seats, vodka was poured. Talks began, territory, boundaries, quiet understandings between 2 underworld powers that had existed in New York for decades. Emma sat behind Ryan, eyes sweeping the room, marking every person, every exit, every shadowed corner. She didn't speak, but she listened to every word, every hint, every threat wrapped in politeness. Then, when the second bottle of vodka was opened, Volkov leaned forward, the smile on his mouth sharpening. "I hear you've acquired an interesting new toy, Bennett." He glanced at Emma. A woman with quite a remarkable past. The air thickened. Ryan didn't react, but Emma noticed his shoulders tighten almost invisibly. Volkov went on, his voice coiling like a snake. "Emma Carter, former combat medic, 2 medals for bravery. Married to a police officer named Derek Vance, who went to prison for abuse and drug connections." He paused to sip his vodka, then added with clear amusement, "And recently, Derek Vance escaped custody. People say he's hunting down his ex-wife to settle an old score." He leaned back, gray eyes fixed on Emma. "An interesting choice for protection, Bennett. A broken woman running from her own ghosts." Emma felt heat flood her face, but she didn't move. She'd been trained not to react, not to let enemies see weakness. Inside, though, every word from Volkov cut like a blade into wounds that hadn't healed. Ryan remained silent for a long moment. Then he set his glass down, slow and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was ice cold and carried the weight of a threat. "She isn't broken. She's forged. There's a difference." Volkov lifted his eyebrows, surprise flickering across his face. He hadn't expected Ryan to defend an employee like that. Ryan continued, blue eyes locked on Volkov's without blinking. "And if you think you can use that information to shake me or anyone in my organization, you've badly misjudged the situation. Miss Carter is mine. Anyone who touches her will answer to the full strength of the Bennett family." The room fell silent. Volkov's guards shifted slightly, hands brushing weapons under their jackets. Marcus straightened as well, ready for anything. Volkov studied Ryan for a long moment, then suddenly laughed. The sound echoing through the room, I like your loyalty, Bennett, very rare in our world. He waved for his guards to relax. Fine then, let's talk about other matters. The meeting continued, but Emma barely heard another word. All she could hear was Ryan's voice repeating in her mind. Miss Carter is mine. She didn't know why those words made her heart beat faster. She didn't know why she felt warmth instead of anger at being spoken of as someone's possession. But she knew one thing. In a room full of enemies, Ryan Bennett had chosen to stand on her side. And that was something she'd never truly had in her entire life. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Volkov's words kept echoing in her head, reminding her that no matter where she ran, the past would always find her. She climbed to the rooftop of the estate, the place she went when the nightmares refused to let go. Cold night wind swept through her hair, carrying the scent of jasmine from the gardens below, and the promise of rain on the distant horizon. New York stretched out far away, millions of lights glittering like stars spilled across the ground. She pulled the pink plastic bracelet from her pocket, the rough little beads brushing her fingers like whispers from another life. Lily had made it the day before the crash, tiny hands threading each bead one by one, tongue poking out in concentration, then offering it with a grin missing 2 front teeth for Mama, so Mama wears it to work and remembers me. Emma didn't hear footsteps behind her, but she knew he was coming. Her instincts had learned Ryan Bennett's presence. The way the air shifted when he entered a space, the way silence grew heavier and somehow safer at the same time. She didn't turn when he stopped beside her, shoulders close but not touching. You can't sleep either, Ryan finally said. Breaking the silence, Emma shook her head. I know you're leaving tomorrow. Her voice was light as wind. I heard it from the people in the house. You're going after Anthony. Ryan didn't deny it. He looked out over the city, blue eyes reflecting distant lights. Then he spoke, lower than usual. Volkov was right about Brianna, too. Emma turned toward him, startled. It was the first time Ryan had brought up his sister on his own, not because someone forced the memory out of him, but because he chose to share it. He went on, gaze still fixed on the horizon. She was 16 when they took her. I was 24, had just taken over the family after my father was killed. I thought I could handle anything. I thought I was strong enough to protect everyone I loved. His jaw tightened. I was wrong. Silence followed. Wind stirring the leaves far below. Emma waited without pressing, without questions, knowing some wounds needed time to surface. When I found Brianna, Ryan's voice caught on something sharp in his throat. It was too late. They had. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Emma understood. She understood because she'd once stood in a hospital room over Lily's small body, held her daughter's cold hand, begged her to wake up while knowing no miracle existed. I had a daughter. Emma said, her voice no longer steady. Lily. She was 3 when I tried to run from Derek. The car rolled on the highway. I lived. She didn't. She lifted the bracelet so moonlight slid through the scratched beads. This is the last thing she ever made for me. I keep it in my pocket every day because I'm afraid that if I forget how it feels in my hand, I'll forget her too. Ryan turned to her, and in those deep blue eyes, Emma saw something she'd never seen before, compassion. Not pity, not curiosity, but the real understanding of someone who'd stood at the edge of loss and stared into an endless drop. I can't bring Brianna back. Ryan's voice was steady as steel, yet gentler than she'd ever heard it. I can't bring Lily back for you, but I can make sure the man who took your child never touches you again. Emma looked at him, heart kicking faster. Why, she whispered. Why do you care? Ryan didn't answer immediately. He raised a hand and lightly touched the bracelet in her palm, his fingers brushing the rough beads as if they were sacred. Because I know what that feels like. His eyes locked on hers, waking up every day with pain that never fades, wondering what you could have done differently to change the ending, carrying guilt like a shadow that never leaves. He paused. When he spoke again, his tone softened. You don't deserve to suffer anymore, Emma. Nobody does. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She'd cried enough. Instead, she stood there beside the man she'd once thought a devil, and realized that sometimes even devils had hearts. They remained together in silence as dawn began to paint the horizon pink. Two broken souls finding one another in the dark, and the distance between them, only a few inches, had never felt smaller. The news spread like wildfire. Emma paid no attention to social media. She didn't own a smartphone. She didn't care what the outside world thought of her, but Marcus was different. He was the first to tell her about the video one morning after she'd finished training with the security team. "You should see this," Marcus said, handing her a tablet. The screen showed footage from the restaurant's security cameras, a high angle capturing everything that had happened that night. It began with Regina Kessler, forcing Emma to kneel and wipe spilled wine. Face twisted with hate, lips curved in a mean smile. Then Warren Kessler mocking her over the expensive bottle, while the table's laughter echoed like crows. And minutes later, 5 gunmen storming in, chaos erupting, Emma rising like a ghost and taking them down one by one in 20 seconds. The words beneath read, "The woman they humiliated saved their lives 20 minutes later." Within 3 days, the clip had passed 10 million views. Comments flooded in, most raging at the Kesslers, praising Emma. People dug into Warren's hedge fund, his shady deals, the schemes he'd hidden for years. An investigative journalist published a long report about tax evasion and cheated small investors. Clients pulled their money, stock prices collapsed. Within 2 weeks, Warren Kessler lost nearly half his fortune as his reputation fell apart. Regina fared even worse, once the chairwoman of a major charity, a fixture in glossy magazines as a kind socialite. But the video stripped away her image for the world to see. Donors left, the board voted her out, and the society friends she'd called sisters stopped taking her calls. Tammy Wells, the influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers, didn't escape either. Her photos of Emma in the restaurant and mocking captions about the poor waitress came back, spreading at crazy speed. Followers turned away, sponsors canceled. Her accounts locked after thousands of angry messages poured in daily. Boyd Kessler lost every investor backing his cryptocurrency thing. After a famous tech blogger wrote, "This crypto guy laughed at a veteran who saved his life. Would you trust someone like that with your money?" And the answer was no. Murray and Page fell too. The restaurant owner fired Murray immediately after seeing the video and reading thousands of one-star reviews. The coward manager, who dismissed Emma, now couldn't get a job anywhere in the industry. Page, the hostess who'd gossiped about her, was caught stealing tips during an investigation. Lost both her job and her standing in New York service circles. Emma felt no joy hearing any of it. She wasn't someone who enjoyed watching others fall, even when they deserved it, only a strange emptiness. Like karma was inevitable, yet never truly comforting. But one person came to see her and brought something she hadn't expected. Theo showed up at the Bennett estate gates one afternoon, the awkward 18-year old busboy with curly hair and bright brown eyes. Stopped by security until Emma recognized him on the cameras and told them to let him through. "I walked almost 2 hours to get here," he said, standing before her, fingers twisting his shirt like a kid searching for the right words. "I just wanted to say thank you. You saved my life that night, and you didn't let them see you break, no matter how badly they treated you." Emma looked at him. For the first time in weeks, felt a real smile reach her lips. "You're braver than you think, Theo. You were the only one who spoke up for me in that room. That wasn't easy." Theo blushed, but his eyes shone with pride. "I want to be like you, strong, not afraid." Emma rested a hand on his shoulder, met his gaze. "Being strong doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you're scared and you stand anyway. You already did that. Keep going." She invited Theo to stay for dinner. From the dining room window, Ryan watched her talk with the boy, a faint smile touching his lips, the first time he'd seen her truly smile. And he knew that no matter how cruel the world could be, there were still moments like this, moments that made everything worth it. Derek Vance had waited 2 years in prison for this moment. He wasn't a fool. He knew he couldn't face the Bennett family alone. Not as a former cop who'd lost everything. No allies, no authority. Nothing left but hatred and a burning hunger for revenge. But Derek knew how to find allies, and in New York's underworld, there was no Al. I'm more powerful than the enemy of your enemy. Andrei Volkov welcomed him like a gift dropped from the sky. Derek had what Volkov needed, classified information about the Bennetts he'd gathered during his years on the force. Secrets about shipping routes, planted operatives, weaknesses in the estate security system, and in return, Volkov gave him what he wanted. An army, and a chance to reclaim what he believed was his. Emma. The attack came at 2 in the morning. When darkness was thickest and guards were weakest, they cut the power first, plunging the entire estate into blackness in seconds. Then they jammed communications, turning the security team's radios into useless bricks, and then they poured in like starving wolves. Emma was asleep when the first shots rang out. She rolled to the floor before her mind could catch up with instinct, gun already in her hand from beneath her pillow. Through the window, she saw muzzle flashes and moving shapes in the courtyard. Dozens of figures with automatic weapons, more than any force she'd ever faced. She ran into the hallway. Chaos hit her like a wave, gunfire everywhere, screams, shattering glass, boots pounding on wooden floors. The Bennett team was fighting back, but they were badly outnumbered. She saw Brennan collapse at the far end of the hall. Blood pouring from his shoulder, still trying to fire before another attacker rushed him. Emma shot that man down, then dragged Brennan into a secure room. Keep fighting, protect Hugh at all costs. She kept moving, flowing through hallways she now knew by heart, dropping attackers one by one with the cold precision of a former combat medic who'd survived real hell. But there were too many, far too many. She found Marcus at the main staircase, back against the wall. One hand pressed to his stomach where blood soaked through his fingers. He'd taken at least 2 rounds. But he was still shooting with his free arm. "Where's Ryan?" Emma demanded as she dropped beside him. Clamped her hands over the wound, Marcus grimaced, but his voice stayed steady. The study. They've got him cornered. Volkov's leading them, and there's another one. Not Volkov's man. He keeps asking about you. Emma's heart locked in her chest. Derek, he was here. She looked at Marcus, knowing that if she stayed, he could bleed out. But if she went, Ryan would die. And Derek would find her wherever she ran. Go. Marcus said, reading her thoughts, save him. I didn't survive 40 years with this family to die from a few lousy bullets. Emma squeezed his hand once, then sprinted away, racing through hallways littered with bodies, both friend and foe. Blood and shattered glass everywhere. She kicked open the study doors. The sight inside made her blood boil. Ryan knelt in the center of the room, hands bound behind him, blood streaking from a cut on his forehead. 5 of Volkov's soldiers circling him, guns aimed from every angle, Andrei Volkov standing opposite. Triumphant smile on his face, gold, plated pistol in his hand, and beside him Derek. He looked older than the last time she'd seen him in court. Hair streaked with gray, face carved with deep lines of hatred and prison years. But his eyes, those steel gray eyes she'd feared every night, hadn't changed at all. They were still cruel, still obsessed with control, still fixed on her like she was something that belonged to him. Hello, my love. Derek's voice slid into her ears like poison. I finally found you. Emma didn't tremble. She'd trembled in front of Derek too many times in the past, shrunk back whenever he raised his hand, cried and begged and prayed for the pain to stop. But that was the Emma from 4 years ago, the Emma who died with Lily on that blood-soaked highway. The woman standing here now was something entirely different, forged in fire and loss, and she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She only hated him. Derek stepped closer, gray eyes looking her over with that sickening look of ownership she remembered all too well. You look different, sweetheart. Thinner, paler, still beautiful, still mine. I'm not yours. Emma's voice was ice cold. I never was, Derek laughed, the sound making her stomach turn. You were always stubborn. That's what I loved about you. And what I hated. His head tilted, eyes darkening. You ruined my life, Emma. You put me in prison. You took everything from me. And now I'm taking it back. Volkov stood nearby with a satisfied smile. Signaling his men to step away like this was a show he meant to enjoy. Ryan remained on his knees, blood streaking his forehead, but his blue eyes never left Emma, not pleading, not begging, only fixed on her with a look she couldn't understand. Derek came closer. Emma didn't move. Letting him approach, the distance closing, 2 steps, 1. Then his hand lifted to touch her face. The way it had so many times before, the touches turned into blows. But this time Emma was faster. She seized his wrist, pivoted, and in one sharp motion slammed him to the floor. Derek roared in shock and fury, lunging at her with the brute force of a man who'd used his fists as weapons for years. But Emma wasn't a victim anymore. She was a fighter. They clashed in the shattered room, gunfire and distant screams echoing through the halls. Derek stronger and larger, but Emma quicker, sharper, carrying something he didn't have, the calm of someone who'd already made peace with death. He swung and she slipped aside. He kicked and she blocked. He charged and she turned his speed against him and sent him crashing down. A punch to the face, a knee to the gut, an elbow to the temple. Derek staggering, blood pouring from his nose, yet laughing, the wild laugh of a man who'd lost his mind. You killed our daughter, he snarled, venom spraying from every word. Lily died because of you, because you tried to run. If you'd stayed home, if you hadn't fought back, she'd still be alive. Emma froze, and in that instant Derek lunged, driving a small knife into her side. Pain ripped through her body. But she didn't fall. She caught his arm, twisted hard, bone cracking like dry wood. Derek screaming as the blade clattered to the floor. Emma kicked him flat on his back, boot on his chest, gun leveled between his eyes. No. Her voice shook with pain yet stayed steady. You killed Lily. You killed her the first time you raised your hand to me, with every bruise I had to hide. Every night I cried in silence. Every time she watched her father hit her mother and couldn't understand why. You killed pieces of her long before the car ever hit us. I was the one who tried to save her from you. Derek glared up at her, hatred burning in his eyes. Then shoot, kill me, prove you're a murderer just like me. Emma's finger tightened on the trigger. She could do it. She wanted to. He deserved to die. Deserved pain 1,000,000 times over for what he'd done to her and Lily. But then she heard her daughter's voice in her head, that soft voice she'd never forget. Mama is the best in the world. Emma closed her eyes. When she opened them, she lowered the gun. No, she whispered, you don't get to turn me into a killer. You don't get to take anything else from me. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but a gunshot cracked. And he never spoke again. Ryan Bennett stood there, gun still smoking in his hand, blue eyes cold as ice as he looked down at Derek Vance's body. He'd freed himself while Emma was fighting, cutting the rope with a shard of broken glass from the floor. He'd waited, watched, given her the chance to face her own demon. But when she lowered the gun, when she chose not to become a killer, Ryan knew exactly what he had to do. He hadn't hesitated, hadn't warned anyone. He'd simply raised his weapon and fired. One single precise shot straight through Derek's forehead. The man who'd hurt Emma for 4 years, who'd indirectly killed Lily, who'd turned her life into hell, now lay still on the floor, gray eyes staring at the ceiling and seeing nothing at all. Volkov shouted for his men to fire, but it was already too late. Gunshots thundered from the hallway as the remaining Bennett security forces fought back. Brennan leading them despite blood still seeping from his shoulder. Hand steady on the trigger, Volkov's soldiers were surrounded, some dropping where they stood, others fleeing. Volkov himself turned and ran when he realized the attack had failed. He would pay for it later, Ryan knew that, but tonight there were more urgent things to deal with. Emma still stood there staring at Derek's body, legs rooted to the floor. She didn't cry, she didn't shake. She simply stood there feeling the weight of the moment settle onto her shoulders. He was dead, after all the years of fear, after all the sleepless nights watching the door, after all the nightmares she couldn't escape. Derek was finally dead. And she hadn't been the one to kill him. Ryan came to her, steps unsteady, blood still running from the cut on his forehead. Emma realized he'd been wounded somewhere else too, by the way he leaned slightly as he walked, but he was still standing. "Still here, are you all right?" Ryan's voice was rough with exhaustion and blood loss. Emma glanced at the stab wound in her side, blood soaking one half of her shirt, knowing she should feel pain. But with adrenaline flooding her system, she felt only numbness. "I'll live," she looked back up at him. "You killed him." It wasn't a question or blame, only a simple truth of what had happened. Ryan met her gaze without blinking. Yes, his voice was flat, without regret. "You didn't want to become a killer." "I didn't have a problem with that." Emma fell silent for a moment, weighing what she ought to feel. Should she be disgusted? Should she be afraid of this man? He just killed someone in front of her without hesitation, without so much as a flicker. But that someone was Derek, and Emma, though she didn't want to admit it, felt relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm not thanking you because he's dead. I'm thanking you because you didn't make me do it." Ryan studied her. For the briefest instant, she saw something soften in his eyes before it vanished again. "You've endured enough? You don't need more blood on your hands. I already have enough. One more wouldn't change anything." He turned away, ordered his men to sweep the entire estate and make sure no enemies remained. But before he left the room, Emma spoke again. "Don't you regret it?" she asked, not because she wanted him to, but because she needed to know. Needed to understand who the man she'd chosen to stand beside really was. Ryan stopped, looked back at her over his shoulder. "He hurt you. He killed your daughter. He came here to kill you." Voice like stone. "No, I don't regret it. I'd do it 100 times over if I had to." He walked out, leaving Emma standing in the wreckage, among bodies and the smell of gunpowder, among the ashes of a past she was finally allowed to bury. She looked down at Derek one last time, his face frozen in death, unable to hurt anyone ever again, and realized she felt no guilt and no sorrow, only a strange hollow calm, like something cancerous had been cut out of her after years of growing inside her. Derek was dead. She was still alive, and a man she'd once thought a devil had killed the real monster to protect her. This world, Emma thought as she stepped out after Ryan Bennett, was stranger than she'd ever imagined. The weeks after the attack were weeks of blood and fire. Ryan Bennett wasn't the kind of man who let enemies strike his home and walk away. Andrei Volkov soon realized the fatal mistake he'd made. The Russian Empire Volkov had built over 30 years collapsed in less than a month. Shipping routes were cut. Hidden operatives were dragged into the light. Money vanished from secret accounts as if it had never existed at all. Volkov lost allies, lost territory, lost everything he'd spent his life building. Rumors spread that he'd fled back to Russia, living in fear that the long arm of Bennett would reach him wherever he tried to hide. Emma took no part in those acts of revenge. The wound in her side needed time to heal. She spent most of her days in her room, reading, staring out the window, trying to get used to the feeling of not having to run anymore. Derek was dead. Volkov had fallen. For the first time in years, she could breathe without feeling like someone was stalking her from behind. But that peace came at a cost. Hugh Bennett, already weak before the attack, couldn't handle the shock of that night. Even though Brennan had protected him with his own life, even though not a single bullet had touched him, his old heart hadn't survived. 2 weeks after the attack, the doctors told Ryan that Hugh had only days left. Emma was beside Ryan when he heard the news. She saw something she'd never seen on the face of this steel, hard man before. Fear, not fear of enemies, not fear of death. Fear of losing the last person he still had in his family. Ryan sat at his grandfather's bedside day and night, gripping the old man's wrinkled hand, as if holding tight enough could keep him there. Emma brought him food, made him drink water, stood silently by the window when he needed space to be alone with his grief. On the final night, Hugh asked her to come closer, his voice as thin as wind brushing dry leaves. Yet his blue eyes, the same eyes Ryan had inherited, still bright with strange clarity. "Come here, my girl. Let me tell you a few things before I go." Emma stepped forward, knelt beside the bed next to Ryan, who was still holding his grandfather's hand. Hugh studied her for a long moment, then looked at his grandson, then back at her. "I know you lost a child." His voice rasped like stones grinding together. "I've lost many things too, my son, my granddaughter. And every day I look at this grandson of mine, and I see him carrying the weight of the dead on his shoulders." He paused to draw a hard breath, oxygen hissing through the tube under his nose, then went on, fixing his gaze on Emma. "But you have given him something I never could, a second chance." Emma felt her eyes sting, but she didn't cry. She simply took the old man's other hand, cold and fragile as dry bone. "Don't let him waste it, my girl." Hugh whispered, voice weakening with every word. "I wasted mine. I was too busy building an empire and forgot that an empire means nothing if there's no one beside you when you fall." He turned to Ryan. Emma saw tears sliding down the face of the man she'd once believed could never cry. "Ryan, my grandson, I love you." Hugh's voice was like the last sigh of wind. "And I'm proud of you, of everything you've done, of the man you've become, but don't let the darkness swallow you. Let this girl lead you back toward the light." Ryan couldn't speak. He only nodded as tears dropped onto his grandfather's hand. Hugh smiled, the peaceful smile of someone ready to go. And then, like a candle burning down, the light in his eyes faded. The hand in Ryan's loosened. The room fell silent except for the steady tone of the monitor flattening into a single line. Emma rose, stepped behind Ryan, rested her hand on his shoulder. She didn't speak because there was nothing to say. She simply stayed there, one hand on his shoulder, a quiet presence in the storm of loss. Ryan sat for a long time, holding his grandfather's cooling hand, head bowed, shoulders trembling faintly, and Emma stood beside him, steady as stone in rushing water, because she knew that sometimes the only thing a person needs isn't words at all, but someone there when the world comes apart. Hugh Bennett's funeral took place on a gray afternoon. Low clouds hung heavy over the sky, like nature itself were in mourning. The family cemetery lay on a small hill behind the estate. Rows of gray granite headstones rested under the shadow of ancient oak trees. Hugh was buried beside his son, beside Brianna, beside generations of Bennetts who had gone before him. Ryan stood before the coffin in a black suit, face carved from stone, yet Emma saw the faint shake in his hand as he scattered the first handful of earth into the grave. She stood just behind him, not as his head of security, but as someone who understood what loss meant. Marcus stood nearby, arms still bandaged, the security team lined up behind him, along with several mourners Emma didn't recognize, people from a world she still didn't fully understand. But there were faces she did know, faces from the night at the restaurant. After the service, a middle-aged woman Emma remembered sitting in the corner that night approached her. Red eyes and a white handkerchief clenched in her hand, said she'd never properly thanked her, that Emma had saved her life, and she was sorry she hadn't spoken up sooner. Emma nodded, placed a hand on her arm, told her she was speaking up now. And that was what mattered. The person she hadn't expected to see, though, was Warren Kessler. He stood at the edge of the crowd, alone, without his wife, without his brother, without the crowd he once carried like a badge of power. He looked far older than he had that night at the restaurant, face hollow, suit no longer fitting the way it once had, shadows of sleepless nights in his eyes. When the crowd began to thin, he walked toward Emma. Every step weighted like he was climbing a mountain. He addressed her as Miss Carter, voice hoarse, gaze fixed on the ground, like he couldn't bear to meet her eyes. Said he knew he had no right to be there. Knew he was the last person she wanted to see, but that he needed to say this to her. Emma stood still, without anger and without welcome, and waited. Warren drew a deep breath. When he lifted his head, she saw something she'd never seen in him before. Real shame. He said he'd been wrong about her, about everything, that he'd spent his entire life measuring people's worth by their bank accounts. Believing money and status made him better than people like her. But that night, when the guns went off and he was shaking on the floor, she was the one who stood up. She was the one who saved all of them. And he had been nothing more than a coward with an expensive watch. He swallowed, said he'd lost almost everything, money, reputation, his wife had left. His brother wouldn't even look at him. And he'd realized he deserved it all, not because he lost money, but because of how he'd treated people he thought were beneath him. He looked straight into Emma's eyes. She saw tears pulled there, said he wasn't asking for her forgiveness and didn't deserve it, only that she knew he'd been wrong, and that he would spend the rest of his life trying to become a better man. Emma was silent for a long time, studied the man who had humiliated her and mocked her and treated her like trash, and realized she didn't hate him anymore. She only felt a deep exhaustion, tired of hatred, tired of anger, tired of carrying poisons that didn't belong to her. She told him it wasn't too late to change, and not to say it to her, but prove it with his actions. Warren nodded as the tears finally slipped down his cheeks, then turned and walked away, shoulders bowed, yet his steps a little lighter, like he'd shed part of the weight that had crushed him for months. Emma watched him go, and understood that forgiveness wasn't a gift she'd given him at all. It was a gift she'd given herself. That night, Emma found Ryan on the rooftop. He was standing alone, staring out at the city the way he had countless times before. But something about his posture was different now. His shoulders were no longer stiff. His jaw was no longer clenched. It was as if Hugh's death, painful as it was, had carried with it a strange kind of release. Permission to finally lay down burdens he'd carried for far too long. Emma stepped beside him. For the first time, she didn't hide the pink plastic bracelet in her pocket. She wore it openly around her wrist, the rough little beads catching the moonlight. When Ryan glanced down, he didn't need to ask what it was. "You're wearing it," he said softly. Emma nodded, fingers brushing the beads in a motion carved into muscle memory. "She deserves to see the sky, not just the inside of my coat pocket." Ryan was quiet for a moment before turning toward her. Distant city lights reflected in his deep blue eyes. "You've changed, Emma. From the first day you came here, you've been different. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally became yourself." Emma studied him, realized he had changed too. The ruthless, cold man she'd met at the restaurant seemed to have faded into someone who could smile and grieve and stand beside her in her worst moments without demanding anything in return. "You have too," she replied quietly. "You're not the devil I thought you were." Ryan let out a soft laugh she had learned to treasure. "I'm still a devil, just yours." They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder. She felt his warmth bleed into her and chase away the chill of the spring night. She didn't know who moved first, only that suddenly there was no space between them. Ryan turned and lifted his hand, fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that treated her like something precious and breakable. "I'm not a good man," he whispered, blue eyes locked onto hers. "I've done unforgivable things. I've killed. I've destroyed. I don't deserve you." Emma placed her hand over his, kept it against her face. "I'm not perfect either. I survived. That's what survivors do. And now what do we do?" Ryan asked, voice rough with feelings he'd held back too long. "We choose," Emma said without looking away. "Every day we choose to be better than yesterday. We choose the light instead of the dark. We choose each other." Ryan bent his head until their foreheads touched, breath warm against her lips. "Then I choose you, today, tomorrow, for as long as we have." Then he kissed her, not with hunger or possession, but with the tenderness of two broken souls, finally finding one another among the ruins of their lives. His lips were warm and careful. Emma felt tears rise, but didn't let them fall, because these weren't tears of pain. They were tears of healing. They remained there under the moon, the sleeping city below. Two people who had walked through hell and at last found their way home. While the pink plastic bracelet on Emma's wrist shimmered in the moonlight, as if Lily herself were smiling somewhere far away. Yet never gone, blessing her mother in silence, 3 years later. Emma stood before the gates of a small school in the suburbs of New York. Children's laughter echoed across the playground. Late afternoon sun spilled like honey over the pavement. A bronze sign at the entrance said, Lily Carter Memorial School. Every time Emma saw that name, her heart warmed just a little. The school had been her and Ryan's dream, built to help orphan children and struggling families, so that Lily could keep living on in the hearts of hundreds of other children. Even though she was gone, Ryan stood beside her, hand wrapped tightly around hers, the man who had slowly stepped away from the underworld to focus on real projects. Handed the empire over to Marcus to manage, he wasn't the devil the world had once feared anymore, but a man learning how to live in the light. One day at a time. Then a small figure came running toward them, black hair flying in the wind, eyes blue as the deep sea. Just like Ryan's, but a smile bright as the sun, Willow, their adopted daughter, the 5-year-old they'd taken in 2 years earlier from an orphanage. The child who had brought laughter back into a mansion that had been silent for far too long. Mama, look at this. She lifted her tiny hand. I made this for you. Emma knelt. When she saw what was in her daughter's palm, tears rose before she could stop them. A plastic beaded bracelet, blue and pink, rough and imperfect, just like the one Lily had made for her so many years ago. It's beautiful, my love, Emma whispered as she pulled her daughter into her arms. It's the most beautiful thing Mama has ever seen. Ryan rested a hand on her shoulder. They stood there, a family built from broken pieces, a love that had bloomed out of darkness. A future rewritten from pages soaked with tears. Lily's pink bracelet now lay in a glass case on Emma's desk. Beside Willow's blue and pink one, 2 generations, 2 hopes, 1 heart that had learned how to beat again. Emma and Ryan's story reminds us that no matter how cruel life can be, no matter how painful the past has been, we still have the right to choose to stand instead of fall, to choose forgiveness instead of hatred, to choose love instead of closing our hearts. And sometimes the people who seem like devils are angels in disguise, waiting for someone to see the light inside them.